Hello, everyone. This is Kaushal Zubair with the KZ Show. The objective of the show is to transform lives by sharing ideas that inspire action. Things are constantly changing, and especially 2020 elections have moved the pendulum completely when it comes to immigration laws. Many immigration policies have changed or reinstated, which would have huge impact for the generations to come. In this episode, we will hear from our two panelists, Mariam Daud, Principal Attorney at Johnson and Massoni. She is based in DC, and Fazila Wahid. She is the principal and also the chair of Immigration Practice Group at Masuda Funai. She is based in Chicago. Welcome.
Thank you
for having us.
Please share with us, as immigration law, there are specialties within that. So please share with us, each of you, what do you specialize in and focus on?
Sure. I can definitely go ahead and start. And thank you again so much for having us on. I actually have my immigration law firm, as you said, is in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been practicing immigration law exclusively for the last 10 years. My main focus is mainly in family-based immigration as well as removal defense. So anybody who may be facing deportation from the United States, I help represent them through the immigration court process. I also do a lot of asylum and other humanitarian-related asylum cases, immigration cases, like U visas, T visas, Violence Against Women's Act cases, and a small number of employment-based immigration cases, but the primary focus of our firm is more the family-based and humanitarian and removal defense side.
My name is Fazila Vaid, and I am the chair and principal of Masuda Funai, Eifert and Mitchell. I practiced employment-based immigration. When I started out, I did do family and removal defense, but for the last 15 years, my practice has focused exclusively on employment-based immigration. I assist multinational corporations to bring foreign nationals into the U.S. As foreign workers. I also assist students to get employment visas to work in the U.S. after they graduate from U.S. institutions. And I also assist companies with worksite compliance issues. There's this pesky form called I-9, which a lot of employers have trouble dealing with. Particularly where ICE comes and audits the company. I provide assistance in workforce enforcement issues if ICE does perform an audit. So again, my area of practice is exclusively based on employment-based immigration, although I do some family-based immigration, but really the bulk of the practice is employment-based.
Okay, so let's talk about the various ways that people can immigrate to the US. What are some of the common ways?
Sure. So you can absolutely apply to come in here to the United States on a green card through family. You can come in through an employer. There's also a program known as the Diversity Visa Lottery Program, where you can enter a chance to win a green card to come to the United States. And that's really more, those options can be for people who are outside of the United States, and then a couple of those can be for people who are inside of the United States. When you're inside of the United States, there's also some other ways to get green cards. Through humanitarian-based visas. You can do it if you've been the victim of a crime in the United States. If you've been the victim of a crime and you've called the police for help, for instance, you can get a green card through a U visa. Or if you've been a person who was married to a US citizen or a permanent resident, but you were abused in that situation, you could apply to get a green card through that way. So there are a variety of ways to get green cards within the United States, as well as some ways to get it outside of the United States. And if Fazila, you want to expand on that more too, you can definitely go ahead.
Right. So I like to refer to it as love, lottery, and labor. Those are the three ways. That's kind of a nice way to think about it. But obviously, family-based immigration isn't just marriage-based, right? It encompasses a lot of different family relationships. On the employment-based side, there are various visa categories that can be utilized to obtain permanent residency, just as there are on the family-based side. And in terms of like the specifics, it gets very there are a lot of nitty-gritty details to the process, but generally most employment-based applications require an employer sponsorship in order for the individual to apply for permanent residency in the US on the basis of employment.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember it's actually March 13th when I landed at JFK 20 years ago. And came on employment visa on H1B1. And today I'm sitting over here in Southern California, being a citizen and raising a family. So many things, definitely, it's a life-changing event for anybody, whoever is migrating here. So in the past 50 days, we have definitely seen in news that many things have changed. What are some of the significant changes that have been made with the new government coming in?
I think there's been quite a few changes. There's been an emphasis on reversing a lot of the Trump administration's immigration policies. That really appears to be the primary focus of this administration. For instance, we saw a rescission of the travel ban that applied to the majority Muslim countries. That was one of the very first things that happened. There was also a review ordered of Trump's asylum policies, which under the Trump administration, many immigration advocates could tell you that there was essentially an assault on the asylum system in the United States. So there's been a review ordered of that. Just today in the news and yesterday, you saw that there was a Supreme Court case where the Biden administration essentially said, we're no longer going to pursue this case of the public charge rule, which was a rule that has always existed, but the Trump administration essentially put forward a more expansive public charge rule that was more discriminatory and made it more difficult for immigrants from more meager means to be able to apply for a green card, because they would be penalized for taking advantage of certain government benefits. So we saw a reversal of that today. We've also seen a restoration of temporary protected status. The Trump administration tried to take away temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of people from different countries. So we've seen that. We've seen a restoration of DACA, which was also pretty much taken away for the most part for new applicants who wanted to apply for DACA. They took that away. And so the current administration has fortified DACA and has restored DACA. We also have this big proposed immigration bill that has been put forward in Congress, which if passed could give a pathway to citizenship for over 11 million people, as well as these standalone immigration bills that could give a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, which are essentially people who came to the United States as young children, as well as other people on temporary protected status and agricultural workers. So this administration has been very, very active in immigration. I certainly think there's still a long way to go. But I think that they're also limited in how fast they can accomplish some of the things that they want to do, because Trump, under his administration, I know Fazila can attest to this, there were changes nearly every day, every week. As lawyers, we had to keep up with them all the time. And I had so many clients whose cases just one day they were on, and the next day they were off, and then one day they were on again, because the policies were just constantly changing. So that's, I think, given just the number of changes that were made under Trump, the Biden administration has really a long way to go. But I'm personally pleased to see how active they've been and how much they've stuck to their commitment of making sure that they could restore the immigration system in this country.
Yeah, I'd like to add that during the Trump administration's kind of rule, 4-year rule, obviously there was a lot of emphasis on the border wall, right? And President Biden stopped the construction of the border wall. So that was a significant change. And a lot of those resources will be allocated, hopefully, to programs that will benefit in reforming the immigration system, the broken immigration system, I should say, because it is broken. And there has to be a lot of change that needs to take place. I also want to point out that there's one kind of minor but symbolic change that has occurred already within the administration, but will take place if the U.S. Citizenship, what is it? U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 is passed, and that is, and again, the Biden administration has already taken steps to kind of refer to what immigrants are commonly, or non-immigrants are commonly referred to in the statute and regulations as aliens, which is kind of a very, off-putting term, and it otherizes those individuals. And President Biden has said that he wants the term changed to non-citizen. And those of us who practice immigration law, and I'm sure, Miriam does the same thing, I don't like to use the term alien. I've always used foreign national, because to me, that just, sounds better. But it's really a nice change, even if it's just symbolic, to make the U.S. be a more welcoming country than how the previous administration had portrayed us. And one of the things the previous administration had done was they had actually changed the mission statement of the USCIS to make it seem or reflect a more America First agenda. And President Biden's approach is to make us seem like a more welcoming and country that's actually very amenable to accepting immigrants and non-immigrants to support our economy and our industries.
Do we have any data of why do we need immigrants? I went to Japan a couple of years ago and realized that Japan does not have any immigration policy. You cannot migrate to Japan. And so when we look at the US, why do we need immigrants?
So immigrants have been coming or flocking to the U.S. since the earliest days of the establishment of the Republic. Now, in terms of when the immigration really, how should I say it? The 1965 immigration bill really completely changed the landscape of immigration in the U.S., and we started allowing people to come from foreign countries, and it has benefited our technology, our engineering, you name it. Every industry possible has benefited from immigrants coming to the U.S. Our agricultural industry, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but if we did not have migrants coming to the U.S., particularly the seasonal agricultural workers, to pick the fruit that's on the trees in the summertime or in the fall, all of those the industries would really collapse. And there have been studies done on this when we have restricted immigration in the U.S., particularly the H-2A and H-2B program, where U.S. employers in the agricultural industries have really shouted and said that they need these workers to come to the U.S. But it's not just any one industry; it's all the industries, and understanding that the Biden administration has proposed changes in the new bill that will help. Again, not only the agricultural industry, but they also realized that the foreign students who are coming to the U.S., once they graduate and they get jobs in the U.S., they help the industries that they serve. So the STEM field, again, is one of the fields, I guess the STEM, and just to define it, science, technology, engineering, and math. Those are areas where a lot of U.S. Citizens and green card holders do not pursue education in, and that's why we need foreign workers, and we have the H-1B program because we need foreign workers to serve the U.S. employers who need the foreign workers to contribute to our to our vast industries.
And Fazila, I was actually going to ask you about this. What are your thoughts on kind of the struggles that foreign students have here after they finish their degree, because that's something I get consulted on with a lot. You know, you have these really talented and educated people coming from all different parts of the world to study here, but then once their course of study is finished, if they don't have a job, or if they're not, you know, kind of immediately getting into a certain visa category, they're stuck. And I'm just curious to know, like, kind of what your thoughts are on that, and like just immigration policy in general relating to that.
Right. So unfortunately, a lot of students have really one path to get a job, unless they are nationals of certain countries, and they can apply for what's called an L1 visa or an E visa. And a lot of Japanese nationals take advantage of those visa programs. However, if you are from India, or if you are from Pakistan, or if you are from, you know, a country where there isn't a lot of trade or multinational exchange, then those individuals have what's called optional practical training, which is work authorization for either a one-year period, or if the individual graduates from with a STEM degree, then they may have an additional 2 years of work authorization. And while they are in this work authorization period, they need to apply for what's called an H-1B visa, which is a visa that allows an individual to work in a professional role. So an engineer, a physician, an IT professional. So with respect to the H-1B program, it's not just as simple as applying for an H-1B, getting approved, and start working. There's actually a lottery. There are only 65,000 H-1B numbers available for individuals with a bachelor's degree, and then an additional 20,000 numbers available for individuals who graduate from a U.S. institution of higher education with an advanced degree. And the H-1B numbers, if you are able to secure one of these coveted H-1B numbers, then the individual can work for a 6-year period total in the U.S. And during that time, the individual would apply, have the employer sponsor him for permanent residency. So unfortunately, you know, so some individuals are eligible to submit a request for an H-1B number through the lottery, perhaps once or twice, and other individuals, if they have a STEM degree, can stay here longer on an OPT and apply for a longer period. Hopefully they're selected within the 3 or 4 years that they're in the US. And if they're not selected, then unfortunately the US loses out on that individual's education, and that individual would have to return home, unless there's another visa category that would allow the individual to remain in the US. So as I mentioned, our immigration program is broken because a lot of students who have studied here and who have vast knowledge, unfortunately, unless they are able to secure an appropriate work visa, they're often looking, and it's a struggle because there's this trust always, right? I want to work, I need to work, I have an education, except I have to abide by the immigration laws. And if I can't secure an appropriate visa, then unfortunately I would have to, the individual would have to leave the US. So it is a very stressful period for nationals. That leads me to questions regarding the family-based immigration system, because we have a lot of individuals who come to us who are trying to immigrate through employment, and it is a very long road. And they come to us and they say, well, I've met a US citizen and I want to get married. Is that a faster way to get a green card as opposed to employment-based? And Miriam, you could probably shed some light on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of the fastest ways. If you're married to a United States citizen, generally, it is one of the faster ways. And I think that's because the immigration system in the United States has been built on this concept of family unity. And a lot of our various visa categories in the family-based system, they reflect that. So getting married to a US citizen, if you're here in the United States on a certain visa, or maybe you're not on a visa any longer, maybe your visa is expired or you've fallen out of status. In some situations, you can absolutely still get your green card from within the United States. But it's really important for people to know that the USCIS, which is the agency that looks at these cases, they have to assess whether or not your marriage is a good faith marriage. They have to assess if it's genuine and bona fide. And if you're able to prove that, then you can get your green card from within the US. You don't necessarily have to leave to process in any way. And most of the time, this can really be done within a 1 to 2 year period. That's a general estimate, just because every single case is different. You'll have some people say, I got it in 6 months, or it took me 2.5 years. Immigration processing timelines is a very hard thing for a lawyer to be able to give a very concrete answer on. But generally speaking, yes, it can be one of the fastest ways. And again, I think it makes sense, because if you have been working here and you've established ties to this country, and then all of a sudden you meet someone who you want to marry and build a life here with, I think from a policies perspective, I think it definitely makes sense.
Where we are right now and how the policies are changing, where do you see US in the next 10 to 15 years?
That's a really good question. I think, I've been doing this maybe a little less than Fazila, but just based on what I've experienced as a lawyer in the last 10 years, I haven't seen this much, I guess, of a focus on immigration. I think it's a very hot topic right now. And I think that social media and this younger generation of people have really helped bring this topic to the forefront in a way that, I haven't seen before, or that I've heard about before. And I think because you have these, more grassroots movements online, where people are really pushing politicians and congressmen to have legislation passed to make the system better. I personally feel hopeful. I feel confident that we'll see some changes that would ultimately result in a system where, there's more speed, there's more fairness, there's more justice overall. And I think that you can kind of see that in Biden's proposed immigration bill, which Fazila referenced earlier, is the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. I did read that bill. It's over 350 pages. And there are so many things in there that really was jaw-dropping to me, because it's a very aggressive, very bold agenda, and it's really long overdue. You see things in there from
those that you find there.
So some of the big things are providing a pathway to citizenship for undocumented individuals in the United States. I personally consult with many people from different countries all over the world who are living here in the United States but don't have lawful U.S. immigration status. They may have entered the United States with a visa, but they unfortunately could not switch to another visa category, or maybe they came here as a young person with their family through no choice of their own, and they grew up in this country, went to school here, have paid their taxes, have built their own lives, maybe married and have children, but they have no way of ultimately achieving the goal of getting their permanent resident status. So the biggest and most important thing, I think, of the Biden bill is the pathway to citizenship for 11 million people. And
those 11 million people, they are inclusive of DACA? Or it
is inclusive of DACA. Yes. It'd be inclusive of DACA. It'd be inclusive of people with TPS. It'd be inclusive of people who are in the agricultural fields, as well as essential workers, and people who meet certain criteria. Maybe they're not DACA, TPS, or one of those categories, but if they meet certain criteria, like pass a background check, show payment of taxes, show certain physical presence requirements, they'd be able to benefit from this pathway to citizenship. And the bill essentially proposes an 8-year path to becoming a U.S. citizen, which I think is important, because so many people in this country really are living in a way where they are looking over their shoulder. They don't feel safe. They don't feel secure, despite the fact they've made this country their home. So that was, to me, one of the most impressive parts of the bill, as well as some other provisions that change various parts of the system. So we saw some language in there about expediting family-based immigration. So there was a provision in there that expanded a current non-immigrant visa that we have called the V visa. But basically, as you may know, certain family-based immigration visas take years. So for instance, if you're applying for a sibling, if you're a US citizen and you're applying for a sibling who's abroad, that process takes about 15 years and your sibling has to remain in their country while you're here in the United States. But in the proposed bill, there would be a way for someone to apply for a visa to come into the United States and stay here and work while they're waiting for that visa process to pass through, which is
that
also
would be a big change.
It's a big change. When I saw that, I was thrilled because I do tons of family-based immigration, and the hardest part for me is breaking it down to people and telling them that, this is not going to be a fast process. It's going to take some time. And to be able to have an opportunity to come and reunite with your family while you're waiting for your visa, that'd be pretty big. And there's also some things in there about reforming the immigration court system, which is extremely backlogged and broken. There are some provisions about asylum, particularly this rule where when you come into the United States, currently under US immigration law, you have to apply within 1 year of your arrival. And there's so many people who don't know that. Some people who enter may not know there is asylum. They may not recognize that they have the right to apply for it or that they have to apply for it within a certain time frame. So this bill is actually taking that 1 year debt limitation away, which would open up more opportunity for people to apply for that. So it has a lot of good things. It's so much I could go into, and but it has been described as a very bold agenda and one that could really shape the landscape. And in the next few years, if this were to pass, maybe more can come from it.
And when do we expect it to pass?
Fazila, I don't know if you've heard much on that, but I haven't heard on any timeline. I do know that next week, the week of March 15th, they're calling it Immigration Week in Congress, and they are focusing on 3 or 4 standalone immigration bills that are kind of smaller versions of the comprehensive immigration reform bill that Biden proposed. So we have the DREAM Act being voted on next week, as well as the Promise Act. There's also the No Ban Act, which is an act that, which is a bill, if passed, will prohibit any president from being able to discriminate and not allow certain people into the US based on their religion. So that's being looked at, as well as a bill that would give a pathway to citizenship for agricultural workers. So those 4 bills are going to be looked at next week in Congress. I think that they're trying to push those because if they can achieve some sort of reform for a smaller subset of people, then maybe that could give some more momentum to the bigger bill. So I don't know what'll happen with the bigger bill. I'm keeping my eyes on that, but I know next week some of the smaller bills will be voted on.
Yeah, I mean, comprehensive immigration reform is a promise that multiple Democratic administrations have made without success. So, and the way the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, I mean, if you look at it, it is very, very generous, and it is very unlikely that it would pass in its entirety with Republican support. So if as Miriam said, parts of it could get passed, I think that a lot of people would still benefit and be happy. But the expectation that the entire bill will pass without any objections from the Republicans, I think it's really, really unlikely. And I don't mean to be a pessimist, but it's just that's just how our administration works. I think that one of the other really amazing aspects about this bill is, and I was really excited because I do some family-based, and green card holders cannot, as Maria mentioned, the V visa, which was in existence a long time ago, but it really doesn't benefit anyone because it was present for a very defined period of time. But if there's a provision in the bill that will reclassify how an immediate relative is defined, and an immediate relative is the spouse, minor children, or parents of a U.S. citizen, and there's no quota or numerical limitation, so they can immigrate immediately to the U.S. And so the bill seeks to also include green card holders and their spouses and minor children as immediate relatives. Right now, the spouses and minor children of green card holders have to wait their turn outside the U.S., and it's just awful. I think Mariam can attest to this. I don't even deal with it that much, but I mean, it's just, it's hard for families to be separated. And so if they could even just, that portion of the bill, if that could be passed, it will benefit so many people. And of course, the visa provision will also benefit people because, again, it will allow people to be in the U.S. and together as a family while they're waiting out the green card process. Some of the employment-based provisions that are going to be really helpful. The process to apply for permanent residency for someone from India, in particular, or China, it's estimated that it will take almost 60 years or more, even 100 in some cases. Based on backlogs, because there are so many applicants that apply for employment-based visas from India. And so there is such a huge backlog that there's a provision that if, again, if the bill passes, or at least this provision passes, there are a number of things that will benefit all employment-based applicants, but in particular Indian nationals. Currently the cap for employment-based visas, immigrant visas, is 140,000. It would be raised to 170,000. So that's significant. It's going to also eliminate all per country quotas. And so again, everyone would have to wait the same amount of time. And the bill actually indicates that if you've been waiting 10 years, then you can apply for permanent residency at that point. No one would wait for more than 10 years, essentially. However, the bill would open up the wait times for other nationals. So while the Chinese nationals and Indian nationals would benefit, everyone else would kind of all be on the same playing field. And so potentially long waits for everyone, but hopefully not more than 10 years. And again, if you talk to anyone who's trying to achieve immigration through employment-based, I mean, they will tell you that it is such a long road, and it's very it's very stressful for them because they may have homes here, and if they lose their job, then they may be concerned about what's going to happen with my house, my car, my pets, and so the bill would provide a lot of relief to employment-based immigrants who are trying to get permanent residency. There are also provisions to allow the recapture of unused visa numbers from previous years, which isn't something that is currently being utilized effectively. There are also some interesting provisions that will create pilot programs to generate business or investment in the EB2 and EB3 category, in particular geographic areas. And for students, one of the benefits that is being proposed in this bill is right now, if you're a student and you applied for permanent residency, there's this concept called dual intent. You, as a student, you should have the intent to return back home and not apply for permanent residency. That's inconsistent with your status. And so the bill will actually give students dual intent, which is a benefit that H-1B holders have and L-1 visa holders have, but not all visa categories have this concept that's available to them. And so again, with this, students would be able to apply for permanent residency without being concerned about their underlying student status. It also the bill will also give spouses and children of temporary work visa holders, like H-1B spouses and children, work authorization. So right now you have a lot of young kids who are high school age or older, who are dependents on their parents' H-1Bs. They can't work. So imagine a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old wanting to work, but not being able to even work part-time. In the summers. So again, if the bill is passed, then it would give work authorization to a class of individuals who, up until now have never had the opportunity to have that employment ability. It also will extend the time that dependents can remain dependents on their parents' green card application. So right now, if you turn 21, essentially you're kind of out of luck unless you qualify for protection under the Child Status Protection Act, which, as Mariam can tell you, is kind of a complicated formula and it doesn't always work. And unfortunately, a lot of, we're seeing now, at least with our practice, we have a lot of individuals, particularly Indian nationals, who we've been representing for years, and they're coming to us and telling us, oh, by the way, my child is turning 21 and wants to apply for medical school or wants to apply to graduate school. What do we do now? We do have to pay for tuition, and unfortunately, right now, the only solution is that those kids have to switch to F1 status and then start the whole cycle again that their parents had to go through. F1 to OPT to H1B or whatever, other visa category that they're eligible for. And again, you're going to see a whole generation of young students who were essentially raised here and know no other country, but who are stuck in the immigration system because they aged out. So the bill seeks to protect those individuals and allow them to get their permanent residency with their parents who may already be in the process. Students also who earn doctoral degrees would benefit from applying for permanent residencies, and they would not be counted under any sort of quotas. And so if you have a very smart Iranian PhD student who a university wants to hire as a professor or as a researcher, they wouldn't have to go through the quota process. They wouldn't have to wait 10 years. They would be eligible to apply for permanent residency immediately. So there are a lot of amazing provisions in the bill. If they could get passed, I think that it would benefit a lot of people who are here legally. I think that the focus is on the 11 million undocumented individuals who are in the U.S., but there's this whole legal immigration system that is also being harmed because there aren't enough visas to go around.
Do we know how many of those are there?
I don't know the exact number, and I didn't check before the call, but there are a lot. As I mentioned, for Indian nationals, it's estimated that if things continue the way they are, one Department of State official in 2012 at a national conference had mentioned 60 years under the legal immigration process for Indian nationals. And now that estimate has gone up to approximately, last I heard was 60 to 100 years. So there are a lot of individuals in this kind of pipeline who are just waiting. And they're waiting very patiently, and they're waiting legally. So there has to be some relief for them.
Let's switch on the other side. So there's always, we have been talking about, that there are a lot of benefits of bringing in foreign workers. What are the disadvantages of bringing in foreign workers?
I think that there's this misconception that when foreign workers are brought into the U.S., it depresses U.S. wages, and that's completely the opposite of how our immigration system works. Having gone through the H-1B program yourself, you should be aware that there's this concept called payment of a prevailing wage. And this requires U.S. employers who want to hire a foreign worker, especially in the H-1B category, but also for a green card, employers are required to pay what's called a prevailing wage, and that wage is the prevailing wage for the area of intended employment for the occupation. And so employers who want to hire foreign workers can't just hire someone and say, I'm going to pay you 40,000. And and then also then have U.S. workers who are at the same level. There are specific. The Department of Labor publishes wage data, and those that wage data has to be followed. And if the employer isn't willing to pay the prevailing wage, then the employer cannot sponsor the individual for a green card or for H-1B. In fact, this whole process for H-1B lottery selection is going to change next year, most likely. Right now, it's a random selection, so everyone has an equal kind of chance to get selected in the lottery. Next year, only the highest paid individuals in their occupation for the area that they work in are going to be given the highest priority. And so
it would be similar to what Canada and UK is doing right now?
I'm not sure what Canada and UK are doing because my expertise is in U.S. immigration. But yeah, there are 4 wage levels. And for example, if you have a software engineer who will be paid a level 1 or level 4 or level 3 wage, which are the highest wages. So let's just say the level 4 and level 3 wages are 160,000, 150, and 150,000. Those individuals will get priority over other software engineers who are going to be paid lesser wages. So that's probably coming next year. And this was a proposal that was passed by a rule that was passed by the Trump administration, which the Biden administration has put on hold, but most likely it will pass. And in fact, it actually is referenced in the bill that they're considering reviewing it and implementing it. So we think that this is definitely coming down the pipeline. But again, there's this misconception that the foreign workers are taking away or depressing the wages of U.S. workers, and that's not the case. We have to have conversations with U.S. employers.
How about the job opportunities?
Same thing. For the green card process, for the H-1B process, I can tell you that it's really based on no employer would go through the process unless they really wanted that individual, because the legal fees and the filing fees are so high to pay to the government to hire a foreign worker. And just to go through the lottery process, it's a huge headache for U.S. employers. But apart from that, the green card process has built-in safeguards. So U.S. employers can't specifically choose their foreign worker and to just issue a sponsor for a green card. They actually have to conduct a test of the labor market, and if they are able to find a U.S. worker who qualifies for the position, then they can't proceed. U.S. workers cannot proceed with the labor certification process, because the test of the labor market has determined that there are U.S. workers who could do the job. And so there are safeguards built in place that protect U.S. workers from this process, or in this process, I should say.
Miriam, your thoughts?
I don't think there's any disadvantage to having foreign workers here. If anything, this country was built by immigrants, and you wouldn't have, these wonderful companies or small family-owned businesses, you name it. So to me, I think the more the merrier, the more from people from different walks of life. I don't see any disadvantage at all. And I think Fazila did a great job touching on why people might think that, it is a disadvantage to have a U.S. foreign worker. But as she articulated so well, U.S. employers are supposed to go through so much just to bring someone here. They have to demonstrate that there are no other U.S. workers that are able and willing to do these jobs. And it's a very strict procedure that one has to go through. So because those safeguards are in place, and because, just again, this country is was built by immigrants, I don't see any disadvantage. And that's not to knock other people who make other arguments, but we're all immigrants. So, yeah.
Yeah, even I remember, and that's I came here before September 11th, so I believe rules were not that restricted at that time. But just to go through the background checks and security clearance, it took the company that was bringing me here about a year and a half.
Yes.
And so it was a very lengthy process before I got to JFK.
Yeah, and those safeguards overseas continue to be in place for anyone who's seeking to immigrate to the U.S. and also on the non-immigrant side. The government fingerprints everyone. They check if anything since 9/11, they're doing background checks, more extensive background checks on individuals to ensure that obviously Americans are protected in this process. So that has not changed. If anything, it's gotten more strict. Certainly the government's interest is to protect the U.S. and those. In fact, right now, up until 2 weeks ago, the government, because of the COVID pandemic last year, had put a ban on immigration, family-based or employment-based, except for immediate relatives. And so that was actually lifted just 2 weeks ago. And so again, when there is something that happens in our economy or in this country, and immigration, it seems, could be problematic for Americans or our public policies, etc. Then our government does take action. So we may disagree with the actions that they take in certain cases, but those safeguards are in place. And I will tell you that when the bans were put in place in 2017 against individuals, nationals from certain countries, it was foreign universities that were based in the U.S. that were raising the biggest opposition to those travel bans because they really see the benefit of having foreign students come and study at their universities. There are also a lot of researchers who work at the universities. And so the travel bans really, and even right now, there are certain travel bans that are in place. And unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the Biden administration has decided that they need to stay in place to protect us. And so, when that happens, usually you see the U.S. corporations and the educational institutions in the U.S. That are affected the most, and they raise the most objections about these bans. So right now, just to kind of discuss the bans a little bit, there are bans in place that don't allow individuals mostly from Europe, Brazil, China, Iran. I'm probably missing a few.
Schengen area in Europe.
Right. To come to the U.S. because of the high rate of infections in those areas. And so we're seeing, unfortunately, it's impacting the companies who have already invested in the U.S., who have, in some cases, some individuals are able to come to the U.S., but their family members can't come to the U.S. So there's a lot of, even just in the last year, there has been a lot of angst in the employment community about some of these bans that are in place. And these bans are specifically related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
If you could change one thing in the immigration system today, what would that be?
I think personally for me, it would really be just to do a full review of the system and make it more, like I said, fundamentally fair and really reduce the backlog. I think that, to me, is the number one priority that should really be focused on.
Is the backlog because of having less manpower? Or
I think that backlog
exists.
I think it exists for a variety of reasons. One could definitely be manpower, but part of it is also there's not enough visas, and I don't think the system is very efficient in the way that it processes cases either. You'll have some people who have their case processing, but then all of a sudden, they're in something called administrative processing, where their case is just on hold for 2, 3, 4 years, and they have no idea what's going on with it. And when they inquire on it, they're told, oh, we're just doing background checks or security checks. And so you're not really sure what's going on. And sometimes then a lawyer has to get involved and has to go through a federal court process to try to sue the government to act on that particular case. So the number one thing I think is processing, being more efficient about how we process cases so that people are able to get their visas in whatever category they are in the fastest and most expeditious way. Because right now, it's for me to hear like it could take 60 to 100 years for somebody from India to immigrate here. That's just crazy. That's insane. I don't think I've heard of that in any other country. I don't know the immigration laws of other countries, but that's a wild statistic. So to be able to make it so that it's more streamlined and efficient and less of a wait for people so that things can just flow from an employment-based way or for families to be reunited faster, that's probably what I would change, is just making things go more smoothly and more fast.
Yeah, I agree with Miriam. I think that the biggest frustration for us is processing times on every aspect of this process. So it's like the application, then the quotas, and it's just like we're constantly waiting. And then right now with the pandemic, I mean, the processing times are just absolutely ridiculous. In certain cases, it's getting better, but it's really hard to predict 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, like what's going to happen. I mean, things, as Miriam said, we're changing almost on a daily basis. With the prior administration, we're kind of settling down right now, but like unless the proposed bill or parts of it passes, it's going to be status quo, and status quo really just isn't going to cut it. With the immigration laws that we have in place. I think that the other thing, I would hope that this administration would concentrate on is there are a lot of people who want to simply come to the U.S. and I'm sure Mariam gets this all the time. I just want a work permit. I just want to work here, and then they want to go home or visit home regularly or live there. They want to maybe work here 6 months of the year and then go back and then come back again. So it would be really nice if we could just have some sort of category that allows people to work and then travel, and not have to, go through like these complicated immigration, particularly on the employment side, categories that require, there's so many hurdles to overcome, and then even after you overcome the hurdles, you have to make sure, again, because everything is very by the book, so you have to follow the rules and regulations, which mean that even after you get your green card, you have to continue to follow those rules and regulations, which is fine, but some people just want to work. They just want to work, and then they don't necessarily want to stay in the US the whole year. And so it would be really nice if we could come up with some sort of visa category that allowed those individuals in certain industries. I'm not saying, any job, but in certain industries where we know that there is targeted unemployment or a very high number of US workers or green card holders who are not interested in those jobs. If those could be supported by foreign workers and, we give them the ability to work, I mean, that would be like, my dream immigration situation, which would allow those individuals to come to the US and to work, and then, return home once they're done with whatever job they have to do. But I just don't know. I think that we'll just kind of have to wait and see. Like I said, it's a very, the current bill is going to be a hard sell. And, I think that a lot of people are optimistic that perhaps parts of it may pass. And I think that that's, the best that we can hope for at this point. And then we'll see. We'll see what happens in the future. Things change so much in our area that, again, it's just really hard to predict the future.
The major overall that happened of the immigration system, I believe that was when you mentioned like 1965. That's
Well,
when we opened up
we opened up the
immigration.
doors, right? I mean, there have been various, like in the 80s, legalization was passed. So a lot of people got amnesty in the 80s. And then in 2001, Mariam wasn't practicing then, but but you're probably very familiar with 245I,
Yes.
which I, don't follow anymore. I don't remember a lot of the provisions of 245I, but I was practicing back then, and that allowed individuals who were here in the U.S. prior to a certain date, who had a petition on file to apply for permanent residency. So that was also a pretty significant policy that was in place. But since 2001, particularly for those who are undocumented, to my knowledge, there has been nothing offered.
No, there hasn't been. I still handle some 245I cases. They do pop up from time to time, but as more time passes, you're going to see less of those. But no, you're right. Since then, I mean, since I've been practicing, there's been stabs at it. There was that one bill by the Gang of Eight back, I think in 2013, maybe it was. They tried to pass comprehensive immigration reform at that time. And you've had the DREAM Act introduced a couple of times. That hasn't passed. So there's definitely been attempts, but nothing has happened significantly in a really long time.
And unfortunately, any action that's happened has been through executive action.
Exactly.
And that's not necessarily the best way to approach immigration, because then you have lawsuits and counter lawsuits. And that's why DACA is constantly at jeopardy of being pulled. Same with, spouses of H-1Bs were given work authorization, again, through executive action. And so I'm not sure what the status of the lawsuit is, but again, there was a lawsuit filed to try to, again, pull that rule that's currently in place. And so the best way to approach immigration is through legislation and not through executive action, because time and again, we've seen that executive action gets challenged in court, and it's highly problematic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you even have a moratorium on deportations too, that Biden, he issued an executive order basically saying that there should be a moratorium on deportations, and they also sued him for that. So a judge in Texas upheld that injunction that the state of Texas was seeking. So you're right, it is very hard to achieve any sort of comprehensive immigration reform or change through executive order. It definitely has to be through legislation.
Okay, and we are coming up on the hour. So any last minute thought? And especially, I would like you to address people who are fearful of immigrants. What message would you give them?
That's a really good question. I want to think about that for a second. So I think, I definitely think that, it is hard to sometimes, you hear so much on the news, and you hear so much about, hear this anti-immigrant rhetoric quite often. And if you're someone who, is listening to that and you feel like there may be truth to it, whatever the case may be, I personally just encourage people to get to know others who are gone through this process. Get to know your neighbors, get to know your community members, try to engage with them and find out about their story and their life. And that's really how I think you can kind of overcome some of these fears and these like maybe stereotypes that exist or biases that exist in people's minds through no fault of their own or through whatever reason that might be there. But that's the way that I look at it, is just reaching out to people that you may not normally talk to and encounter, and that might help kind of shape your thoughts in a different way and might make you see things differently.
I mean, I think that a lot of people don't realize that they have probably, there has probably been an immigrant that has impacted some portion of their daily life. And they just kind of need to think about that in their interaction at Dunkin' Donuts with the person who makes their coffee, to perhaps the person on the phone who's handling their, tech issue for their computer. I mean, or a physician at the hospital where they may be going for a test, right? And so like we have in this country, we have a very rich history of immigrants contributing to, all facets of daily life. And so I think that we just kind of need to keep an open mind and think about all those individuals, and also that this country was founded by immigrants, and that, we need to just kind of stay true to how this country was founded, and just be open to different types of people and what they offer to the U.S.
All right. Thank you so much, Mariam and Fazida, for a very informative session on. And I know we are recording it today. We are talking about it today. I know in 2 months it's gonna change. Some new
Right.
things would come up with immigration, and some new policies will be instituted. So thank you again for being here today and sharing your views and what actually is going on. Definitely, when we look at the immigrant population, we all are immigrants, whether we are first generation immigrant, whether we are immigrant, first generation immigrant, second generation immigrant, third generation immigrant. So we all are immigrants, and immigrants have brought in value in towards making the country more prosperous, and which is evident by any way you look at it. So thank you again. Thank you for our audience to joining us, and looking forward to see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.